Намасте, дорогие друзья! Я Мария Прохорова, ведический астролог, основатель Центра ведических знаний Мукунда. Сегодня у нас немного необычное видео, потому что я пригласила в гости нашего любимого Джйотиш-гуру Марка Бони. Я уверена, что Марка Бони знают все, кто изучает Джйотиш, но на всякий случай напомню то, что он всемирно известный астролог, который в целом изучает астрологию более 50 лет, а Джйотиш, ведическую астрологию, изучает, исследует более 30 лет. У Марка есть огромное количество книг, которые в том числе переведены на русский язык. У него огромное количество статей, мы уже сбились со счета, сколько, очень много. И он, наверное, один из самых известных учеников легендарного индийского астролога доктора Каин Рау. Если приехать в Индию и спросить, знаете ли вы доктора Каин Рау, то 99,9% людей скажут, что да, конечно, это же наш легендарный астролог, все его знают. Марк любезно согласился провести для нас экспресс-урок, и он очень быстро, но глубоко раскроет для нас тему, почему же Венера не является функциональным бенефиком для лагны Телец. Это удивительная, очень интересная и важная тема, поэтому я надеюсь, мы надеемся, то, что вам принесет пользу это видео. Мы с Марком с нетерпением будем ждать от вас обратной связи, ваших, может быть, вопросов, пожеланий. Может быть, у вас какие-то есть темы, которые вы хотите, чтобы Марк рассмотрел, рассказал про них в таком же экспресс-формате. Мы с удовольствием все это рассмотрим и, возможно, снимем еще такие видеоуроки. Что ж, благодарю вас за то, что нашли время, хотите посмотреть урок. И добрый путь. Намасте, Марк.
Namaste.
Thank you for coming. It's a great honor for me to have you here. And before we go to our today's topic, please let me ask you one very important question. Don't you mind?
Not at all. It's a pleasure to be with you, Maria. Go ahead.
Okay. It's related to our topic, actually. My question has short intro. I'm sure you know how popular astropsychology is among Russian-speaking astrologers. And sometimes they don't even know how to use yogas. At the same time, you teach us that yogas are like treasure of Jyotish. And you teach us how to identify, estimate yogas. This is your focus on every lesson. And we like your phrase, yogas show what, dashas show when. And we continue, Mark shows why.
Right.
Yes, and as we all know, you are a Vedic astrologer for 30 years, more than 30 years, and you were a specialist in Western astrology for 20 years. Oh my God! Yes.
That tells you how old I am.
Yes. I have a quote. You know I like quotes.
Yeah.
I will read a little bit. I became adept at delineating personality dynamics through the DOS chart and shied away from the predictive side. I received good feedback on this type of consultation, which was more astropsychologizing than predictive astrology.
Right.
And you have a Master of Art in Counseling Psychology.
This is correct.
Yes. Now, here are my questions. What should know a good modern professional astrologer? Must they have a degree in counseling psychology? Or do they just need to have a lot of life experience? Or do they need to read Sanskrit scriptures? What is your opinion?
Well, first of all, they don't need to read Sanskrit scriptures because these things are in translation. I
Okay.
personally decided with some of the texts like the Jaimini Sutras, I decided I didn't want to rely on the translation, and I taught myself enough Sanskrit so that I could see exactly what was being said. But you don't need to do that, right?
Okay.
Actually, more than anything, to learn Jyotish, you need a good teacher. Right?
Oh,
And this is why I was so blessed to have Kain Rao as my teacher. But of course, being able to, at one point, once you've absorbed all the basics, be able to study the Sanskrit classics of Jyotish is very valuable. Of course, these are all in translation now. And I believe, I don't know how good the Russian translations are, but the English translations are fine, are good. So that's answer one to your question.
Must they have a degree in counseling psychology?
Oh, must they have a degree? No.
No?
Some people are, it's really useful to have, because, inevitably there's one thing to learn Jyotish and to be able to analyze a chart and maybe even to predict on basis on the chart. It's another thing to consult with people, right? And that's where the art of communication and the art of counseling comes in. So to have that training to be able to do that is enormously useful. So I would encourage everyone who wants to also do astrology to get that kind of training. But I also know that some people are born counselors, right? They have a natural empathy,
Yes.
meaning the ability to feel what the other person is feeling. They have a sensitivity about, not just what you say, but how you say it,
Yes.
how the person is going to be able to receive that. And so, we would say with a doctor that they had a good bedside manner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knew how to, treat and communicate with the patient in such a way that they don't scare them, they don't unduly alarm them, and that, they can receive the information in the most positive and best sort of way. So, and, in Prashrahora, the Sanskrit classic itself, it talks about the qualifications of an astrologer. And K. and Rao used to talk about it. Excellent communicator is one of those qualifications, right? And so, because whether we like it or not, if you're a practicing astrologer, a lot of the times you're a crisis counselor, meaning people come to you at a moment when they're in crisis in some way.
Yes.
And so, in fact, that's usually the case. So in a way, Jyotish is crisis counseling. And, it's one thing to be able to be technically good at analyzing a chart and extracting information over it. It's something very different to actually talk to a person about their chart and communicate that. That's a whole different art in of itself. As I said, that has to do with the art of communication and counseling. And so I certainly encourage anyone to get that kind of additional training that could help them learn more and better about doing that. But then I also know that some people are just naturally born having those qualities and characteristics as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Sure.
Now we can dive into our today's topic.
Certainly.
Yes. Speaking of ancient scriptures, as we all know, when a planet rules the Trikona houses, it becomes a functional benefic, even if it is Mars. Also, many of us used to think that lagna lord is always a functional benefic, but you always repeat, folks, not always. Not for Taurus lagna. There is a chapter in Parashara Shastra of Yoga Karakas which says, Mark, please explain us why Venus is not a functional benefic for Taurus lagna.
Well, you mentioned that chapter in Prashrahora entitled Yoga Karakas, but the subtitle is the effects of planets based on their lordship. And this is where the sage goes through every ascendant, every lagna, and gives an opinion about what each planet, based on its house lordship, which house it rules, what kind of planet it becomes for that particular lagna in terms of being a functional benefic or a functional malefic, right? And these are incredibly important principles to understand, but also to be able to apply intelligently. Now, generally speaking, because what the lagna lord rules both an angle and a trine, then in doing so, it can form good Raja yogas, it can form good Dhan yogas, it can form these favorable combinations. So generally speaking, even if the planet is a natural malefic, then that planet can still be very good for that particular lagna, depending, of course, how it's placed, what its condition is, what its association is. This is always the important thing to see. The exception is Taurus. Why? And there's two reasons. At the very beginning of that chapter, it talks about something called technically Kendra Adipati Dosh, which means the blemish that natural benefics get when they rule the angles. The blemish, dosh, that the planets get as natural benefics when they're ruling angles. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that natural benefics turn into malefics when they rule angles. As the way K and Rao used to express it, they become less benefic. They lose some of their beneficness. Conversely, natural malefics, when they rule the angles, lose some of their maleficness. And which would you rather do? Have a benefic lose its beneficness, or rather have a natural malefic lose its maleficness? Obviously, you'd rather have a natural malefic lose its, and you don't want benefics to get reduced in their ability to bring favorable results, which does happen to some degree when a benefic rules an angle, unless if it's the lagna lord. But then why is Taurus an exception? The answer, of course, is that the other house it rules, which would be the 6th house, most planets rule 2 signs, right? Mars rules both Aries and Scorpio.
Yes.
One of those signs is going to be what's called their mula trikona sign, which is a slightly stronger sort of condition than, say, just being own sign. So for Taurus, the 6th lord, the 6th house, is Libra, ruled by Venus, but Libra is its mula trikona. So a combination of the fact that it loses some of its beneficness because it's lording an angle, and the fact that it rules the mula trikona 6, this is why Parashara Hora does not classify it as a functional benefic for that. Now, it doesn't mean that Venus as a lagna lord can't, under certain conditions, give all kinds of good results. But when you're Taurus lagna and you also are running the Venus major period, because it rules the 6th house, depending on some additional things that are going on with it, it can bring some of the very unfavorable results of the 5th house. Let's just say especially health problems.
Yes, yes.
But of course, one of the indications of the 6th house is illness, disease, but also injuries, wounds, right? Accidents.
Yes.
Lawsuits, legal difficulties, debt. These are all some of the negative indications of the 6th house that, again, under the right conditions, can come out when a person runs the major period of Venus when they have Taurus lagna. Now, I'd like to be able to illustrate this, so I should be able to share a screen now, and I'm going to pull up a chart, and I'm, putting the chart in both the North and the South Indian style, so whoever style people look at, they can see one or the other. It should come up this time, yes?
Not yet. Yes, now.
All right. So we see a chart with Taurus lagna, right?
Yes, right.
And actually, Venus here, there's a lot of good things about this Venus. You talked about yogas. It's the lagna lord placed in the strong 10th house with lagna is an angle lord. Mercury is a ruler of the 2 and the 5th. Together they form a good both Raja and Dan yoga.
Yes. And
they also get the aspect of a Jupiter who happens to be Vargotama. It's both in Gemini in the birth chart and Navamsha. And therefore, this Venus major period, which this person just moved into back in March of 2024, holds some very, very good potentials as well. And some of those potentials I've seen them come out in the person's life. But it's also the 6th lord. Now, where a 6th lord Venus for Taurus starts to be in a condition where it might bring some problems is when it's under the influence of a natural malefic additionally, right? Which the way this Venus becomes under the influence of a natural malefic is because it's in Saturn's sign and it's in a mutual glance with Saturn. You see that? So the strongest way in which 2 planets can be connected is when they are in an exchange. So you have to see that this Venus is actually under the strong influence of Saturn.
Yes.
So, and then if I pull out the dasha to a 3rd level, you can see that this person's been running Venus, Mars. Mars is a Maraka 7th lord. It goes to the 12th where it's in its own sign, which wouldn't be bad, but you can see that it also gets the strong aspect of Saturn, very close in degrees. So this is a person who is 70 years old, and has never had any health problems whatsoever. They've been extremely healthy. They exercise. They run 3 miles every morning and swim for an hour in the afternoon, 7 days a week. And they're a yoga teacher. So they're teaching yoga classes all day where they're actually doing the postures. So extremely healthy, extremely energetic, never had any health problems. Well, all of a sudden, they developed I won't go into details what the problem was, but they had to have first one operation and then another operation. And there's been complications, post-operative complications. And they've been in the hospital. This Mars, as you can see, is the 12th Lord in the 12th house as a sub-period Lord, right?
Right.
And in other words, and this is the first time they've ever had any health difficulties. It required 2 operations to deal with the health problem. They've been hospitalized, and they're now in a recovery process, but been in a lot of pain. So one way to look upon this is that Venus is also with the Mercury, second Lord Mercury, but it's the connection with Saturn that makes this Venus period dangerous from the standpoint of the health. Now, hopefully, and the Gemini system, and you can see this in the Gemini system because you can see she's running Gemini containing the GK.
Yes.
Also with the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis, but then also the strong Jupiter, which is a sign that she should recover fully and get past this experience. Jupiter by Rashi, by planetary aspect, is also aspecting this Venus. So this is again a saving grace in terms of the situation not being too bad, but it produced a health crisis, no question.
Yeah.
The first one of her life. So this is Venus as a 6th Lord giving a health problem. So now look at this chart. This is someone also extremely well known to me. They actually came to me for a consultation when they moved into their Venus major period, and you're going to see some similarities here, but in a different sort of way. So again, you're going to see a Taurus lagna. Now, in this case, Venus is actually the 6th Lord in the 6th house.
Right.
And if you think about some of what it's combining with in terms of the kind of yogas that are formed here, there's multiple both Raja and Dan yogas. And she's in very affluent circumstances, has no money problems at all. In fact, I would say independently wealthy. It has done very well in her career life. But you can see that she moved into her Venus period. This would have been back in 2017 at age 62. And, I didn't emphasize this to her when I talked to her, but I very clearly understood that because Venus here is again suffering the affliction of Saturn and is again with a Maraka 2nd Lord, that at some point in the 20-year period of Venus, it was going to bring health problems. Now, this could be predicted just based on her age because it was going to be running from age 62 to 82. But even starting in Venus, she was discovered and was diagnosed with something called multiple sclerosis. It's a degenerative disease of which there's no cure. It can be managed with medication. It can be managed with diet and exercise, but it's a incurable disease that causes a deterioration of the neuromuscular system. Multiple sclerosis is what the technical term for it. So this is again Venus giving a real, in this case, a terrible health crisis eventually, right, in its major period, even as the 6th Lord in the 6th house. But again, this would not be the case if it were not for the additional influence of Saturn here, as in the previous chart. You see?
Yeah.
Now, again, doesn't mean Venus can't bring all kinds of good things in a person's life for Taurus lagna, and I'll show you an example of that. But one that, again, talks about the danger that it can bring health-wise. So this man came for me for a consultation way back in 2015 when he was about to move into the Venus major period. And of course, Venus is the nice lagna lord in the 4th house. And so I told him this could bring him a luxury property. Why? Of course, the fourth house has to do with home and property. Venus is Venus, right? In terms of, and it's in Leo, a sign associated with luxury, right? And he shortly thereafter in Venus purchased a home worth about 2.5 million. Okay? A home here in Southern California, luxury home. And then he eventually sold that for much more. He turned it into an Airbnb that was very good for him financially, and then he eventually sold it for considerably more than he paid for it. So it was bringing him some very favorable experience with regards to property. But then I knew that at certain times in the Venus major period, it could also bring some health difficulties. And one of those periods that I suspected would be problematic that way is the subperiod of Rahu. Why? First of all, you can see that, look at all the malefics associated with this house, right? You've got Rahu there, you've got Mars there, you've got the aspect of Saturn, right?
Yes.
Now, I predicted that he could get another property in Venus Rahu. Why? Because Rahu is with the fourth Lord Sun. And at this time, he bought a home worth $3.5 million. But then there was all kinds of problems with it. Look at this. Look at the afflictions to the fourth Lord Sun. There was an electrical fire in the garage. There was a water line burst that caused problems. I mean, so there was different issues that he had to deal with this new property that he owned. But the problem with these planets in Virgo, they all fall second house from Venus.
Yes.
So you know this idea of dasha lagna, right?
Yes.
Dasha lagna is where we use the sign of the major period as if it's a lagna, and we see the patterning of the chart from there, in which case there's all this malefic influence on the second Maraka house from there. And these planets even fall in the 12th house from the moon. So he's had all kinds of different health problems that have winded him up in the hospital. He's had some operations. So this sub-period of Rahu within the major period of Venus, sixth lord, is another example of a Venus major period under certain conditions at certain times in that 20-year period, bringing significant health crisis and problems. Now, I could show you more examples, but you get the point.
Okay.
Now, I'll show one more example, though, because it's a dramatic one. K.N. Rao once wrote a very interesting article about the potential danger of Jupiter-Venus or Venus-Jupiter periods, either for Taurus or for Libra ascendant. Why? Well, for Taurus, Venus rules the 6th, Jupiter rules the 8th. For Libra, Venus rules the 8th, Jupiter rules the 6th.
Yes.
And he showed examples of how when a person either ran Jupiter-Venus or Venus-Jupiter, then it brought some very unfavorable results. I wrote my own article about these periods and subperiods that you may have seen, right?
Yes.
Well, a long time ago, some people who had just had a child approached me about wanting to have a discussion about the chart of the child. And when they gave me the birth date and I first saw the chart, I didn't like what I saw. Right? And here's the reason. We have Taurus lagna again, right? Venus as the sixth lord, first lord also. Now, look what's happening to the ascendant lord. It goes to the 8th house.
Yes.
With affliction. It's under the influence of the Rahu-Ketu axis and Mars.
Yes.
Mars as a Maraka 7th lord. Now, what happens to Jupiter, the 8th lord? It goes to the lagna. Do you see the exchange between 1 and 8? And it also has additional malefic influence. It's with Saturn retrograde. Jupiter's retrograde, not good from a medical health standpoint. This child was born in the Jupiter major period, spent the first 9 years of their life. This is you talked about yogas and how I emphasize knowing yogas. This combination of the exchange between the first and the 8th lord with additional malefic influence is referred to as a arisha yoga. arisha means misfortune, and misfortune in particular to the body, because the first house, the first floor, represents the body and the health of the body, right? So I knew that there would be significant health problems right at birth. And unfortunately there was. So you talk about, counseling. So, and what you say to a person consulting and what you don't say to the person. Well, I don't say, oh, your child has this terrible arisha yoga in their chart and they're going to have terrible health problems right from the first. Now, of course, I'm not going to say something like that, right? I just said, what K and Rao would do, he would just sort of drop a hint. And, I said something like, in this case, it's a situation where you're going to have to be very careful and very guarding of the child's health. So, I couldn't say not say anything, but I didn't want to sort of alarm the parents overly do. Now, the child survived, right? It dealt with a lot of, but then, this was going to continue in Saturn. And, later the parents contacted me when he was a teenager, 15 years old, and he was running Saturn Venus, which was again going to activate the arisha yoga. And he started having severe headaches, and there were some other problems. Doctors couldn't understand what was going on. By the way, whenever K2 is involved in these kind of things, there's sometimes diagnostic confusion.
Yes.
Right? As you see here, the Venus, the lagna lord, is conjunct K2. They couldn't really understand that they were trying different approaches to treatment. They weren't working. He got so dysfunctional or so in pain so much that he had to drop out of school for a period of time. Now, again, he survived this. He lived through it. And finally, they was able to get some sorts of treatment that gave him some relief. Right? But basically, this is a situation in a chart where it's going to have, to some degree, he's going to be struggling with his health almost his entire life. Right?
Yes.
Unfortunately, that happens to be this soul's particular karma. But is again another example of how Venus in certain sub-periods, in this case, he hasn't run the major period and will never run the major period. But as I mentioned, in Jupiter Venus, and then in Saturn Venus, it was quite predictable that there was going to be pretty significant health issues. Now, I don't mean to scare people, because again, Venus for Taurus, under the right circumstances, can give all kinds of, be forming all kinds of good yogas, and give the results of those. So Saturn for anyone with Taurus lagna, of course, has a special status. It's a yogacaraka planet, right? And so I'm going to pull up the chart of a very famous American basketball player, and he was extraordinarily successful. He was sort of the star of the team, and his team won 13 championships. It was like no other person will ever, have that level of success as a team leader, and their team winning so many championships. Well, here's Taurus. Now Venus is in the good ninth house. Who is he with? The ninth lord and the third lord of sports.
Yes.
Forming very powerful both Raja and Yoga. And when is this going to come out? It's going to come out when he runs Rahu, because Rahu is going to give the results of these, which he started at age 15, which of course, that's when, you're coming into your own. You're starting to come into your own as an athlete. Right? And Rahu Saturn and Rahu Venus in particular were especially hugely successful periods for him. During Rahu Venus, which is a 3-year period, he was he was voted the most valuable player in the professional basketball league here in the US. So I want to show this as an example of how, Venus for the Taurus can give very good results. Now, did he suffer some minor injuries during that time? Sure, which is always the case with athletes, right? You're going to suffer sprained ankles sometimes and bruises and different, nothing ever major, nothing that, took him out of play for any real long period of time. You know, you've heard me say, Maria, that in any combination, you always want to ask yourself the question, what's the best thing that this can give? What's the best result? What's the most favorable result? But then you have to look on the other side. What's a more challenging, unfavorable result that a combination can give as well? Because it's not going to be either or. It's going to be both. And you have to stay out of what I call either or thinking, because that won't serve you well. Because as you know, in any major period, there's going to be potentially some good things, but there's going to be some unfavorable things as well. So this is what I wanted to share with you. Okay.
Yes, I have one question. Should this Venus be blemished? I mean, in the case of a man with very cool property, his Venus wasn't blemished.
Venus in his case was actually unblemished itself, right? So that's why, as a whole, the Venus period has been rather good for him. Unlike the other Venuses I saw that were under the influence of Saturn, right?
Yes.
It was the sub-periods that, in certain sub-periods within Venus, that have proved problematic, particularly the sub-period of Rahu that suffers all affliction. It's with Mars and aspected by Saturn. And, so in his case, it's not like the first two examples or even the last example where Venus itself has got malefic influence and affliction, right?
Okay.
So I hope that clarifies for you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mark, very much. This is, I think, very important topic, and I hope that our, as it's how to say, like a modern word, podcast or old-fashioned word, lesson. I hope that it will be useful for people.
I hope so.
Yes, and I hope you
so.
come.
And maybe I'll just say one more thing, because you're not really doing Jyotish unless you're using yogas. Okay.
Okay.
You may not need to do them to astropsychologize. But what does the chart represent? It represents a person's prarabdha karma, their karma that's due to manifest in this lifetime. And if that's to be known and understood to some degree, then you really need to see any yogas that are in the chart, and then to see how well qualified they are, whether they will really give their fruit or not, right? And then see how they may get activated in the dasha system. This is what really gives Jyotish its predictive power in terms of events. Sure, you can, talk about what this person is like and their personality and some psychological characteristics, and that can be very valuable. When I used to do that with people, they would feel very seen. They'd feel very understood. Like, oh, this person knows who I am,
Yes.
And that can be they can feel seen, and that's a good experience for people. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that kind of consultation or that kind of approach to astrology. But if you're learning Jyotish and you're not learning yogas, then you're missing, you might say, what I would consider the essence of Jyotish and what gives it its predictive power and what separates it from other forms of astrology.
Yes.
So I always, as you know, encourage students to learn yogas and insist that they do that if they want to become proficient at Jyotish. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And let's do this again sometime. Okay?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.